Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely massive. We're talking about biology itself. But look, instead of just running through a list of vocabulary words, let's start at the very bottom line. What actually is life? It's kind of funny because it feels so intuitive, right? We're literally living it right now. But actually trying to pin down the exact scientific definition of what separates the living from the non-living, well, that's a seriously fascinating journey. So let's just get right into it.
Think about this for a second. Have you ever just stood in front of a mirror, really stared at your reflection, and wondered, what exactly is looking back at me? Obviously it's you, but fundamentally, what are you? If we strip away all the human philosophy, the consciousness, the personal identity, you are undeniably a living organism. But what exactly puts you in that category?
Well, in biology, we actually have a very specific checklist, 4 criteria that define a living organism. First off, you gotta have some capacity to move around. Second, you have to consume and use energy, just to keep the lights on, so to speak. Third, you need to be able to respond to stimuli in your environment, reacting to heat, light, or, say, dodging a physical threat. And fourth, you absolutely must have the ability to reproduce.
Which actually brings us to a pretty great observation from our source material regarding that whole reproduction rule. As it dryly points out, you have to reproduce or at least have the biological capacity to do so eventually, quote, so you don't disappoint your parents. It's a pretty funny way to remember a hard and fast biological rule, right? The continuation of a species is basically a non-negotiable cornerstone of life itself.
Section 1. The building blocks, from particles to cells.
Okay, so now that we know what life does, we really need to answer what it's actually made of. To do that, we gotta zoom all the way down to the absolute smallest scale inside of you. And down there, we find tiny subatomic particles, quarks and electrons. Now, when those tiny guys group together, they form the next step up, atoms. Atoms then bond to make molecules, and those molecules stack up, combining to make even larger molecules, compounding in complexity until, boom, we cross a very, very special threshold. We hit the cell.
A single cell is quite literally the smallest possible thing in the universe that can actually be considered alive. This is it, the ultimate baseline. Everything alive on Earth is made of cells. It's kind of the great equalizer, honestly. It doesn't matter if you're looking at a microscopic bacterium that's just one single cell, or the frankly staggering network of trillions of cells that make up a human being. We all share this exact same foundational building block.
Section 2. The ladder of science, mapping the disciplines.
Because nature is built in these progressive layers, or tiers, we actually need entirely different scientific toolkits to understand them. If you want to dive deep into those base-level quarks and particles, you're studying physics. Step up a level to look at atoms and basic molecules, now you need chemistry. Once those molecules get really large and complex, you cross over into biochemistry. And it's really only when we finally reach the level of an entire, functioning cell that we're officially studying biology. Biology is, at its core, the study of life.
But, this actually reveals a really common conceptual problem. Let's call it the high school biology dilemma. Think about your own experience for a second. Biology is almost always the very first science class we're taught in high school, right? Which means we are asking young students to comprehend incredibly complex biological systems before they've ever been taught the underlying physics and chemistry that biology is literally built on. It's kind of like asking someone to understand the roof of a house before they've even glanced at the foundation.
Section 3. Science versus magic. Understanding DNA. Because of that slightly backwards learning order, attempting to study biology without a solid chemistry foundation means taking a whole lot of things on faith. For example, we're told DNA is the genetic code. Okay, sure, but how does that actually work mechanically? Without knowing the chemistry, to a lot of people, it honestly just seems like literal magic. You end up memorizing facts without ever understanding the mechanics beneath them. But I promise you, once you truly grasp chemistry and biochemistry, suddenly the wildly complex world of biology makes this profound, logical sense.
There's actually a fantastic insight from the source material that sums this up perfectly. The more we know about nature, the less and less it seems like magic. And honestly, that hits the nail on the head. This is exactly why so many people return to biology later in life with this totally renewed fascination. Because once those chemical layers finally click into place in your brain, biology ceases to be mysterious. It just becomes this incredibly elegant, understandable machine.
Section 4. Nature's tiered reality. Zooming out.
So, we've talked a lot about zooming in to see the building blocks, but what's truly mind-blowing about nature is how it behaves when we reverse that.
If we zoom out and just observe small molecules on their own, there is no way, absolutely no way, we could predict the staggering complexities and functions of a living cell. Yes, the cell is built entirely out of those molecules, but the life that results? It's an entirely new, emergent reality that completely transcends its individual parts. And we can actually take that exact same logic and zoom out one step further. Just think about basic cellular processes compared to, say, human behavior. Just like molecules can't predict a cell, basic cellular mechanics cannot even come close to accounting for the vast, unpredictable complication of human psychology. Each tier builds on the last, creating a world that is exponentially more than just the sum of its microscopic parts. It is just a staggering, beautiful system when you really step back and look at it. So, if your starting line is biology, the overarching scientific journey is going to involve understanding the microscopic parts of the cell, exploring the wild variety of single-celled organisms, and ultimately mapping out exactly how these simple entities evolved over a few billion years to become every single living thing on Earth today.
Section 5. The ultimate question, looking back in time.
We know what life is made of. We know the disciplines required to understand it. And we know that cells evolved over billions of years. But man, that leaves one massive, glaring mystery. How exactly did life first come about on Earth? How did a bunch of non-living molecules somehow cross that magical threshold to become a living, responding, reproducing cell? Is that something we can ever definitively know? It is the ultimate biological cliffhanger. And honestly, it's the exact kind of question that should keep you wildly curious as you continue to explore the sciences. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, keep asking the big questions.